All right, it is now 4:04 a.m. on February the 9th, 2020. I had intended to discuss a Rouse's in Brownsville twice, and I never got around to it either time, and I've now recorded over 30 minutes. And remember, the reason why I'm recording is that, as I noted, in terms of the speech that I had sought to make to announce my congressional run, you know, what took me 5.5 hours to handwrite, with time permitted for some inserts that I typed, which typed quicker, and then took me basically, in terms of that typing, I guess you consider that part of it, 2 hours to transcribe what I had already written, so no thinking is done. Talking, that took 45 minutes to deliver. So you simply convey more information orally or when you talk than in any form of communication still. And so, for these kind of polemics, it is, and now that I've got my YouTube account up and I've figured out how to convert these to videos that you can put up on YouTube, this is going to be the best way to convey information. And so I want to talk about the concept of a Rouse's at Brownsville, and I want to go back to why I had wanted it at NAPCO and McVeigh. And you have to remember that at that time they were developing the McGowan development. They were developing the McGowan development right off of Hall's Mill, not far from Hank Aaron. And so that was going to bring people into the neighborhood, and it was part of this idea that I had for the whole general area. But, you know, even now in the historic core of Mobile, grocery options are rather sparse. You have the Publix in Midtown. You have Gria's there at Broad, and Government. And that actually is the best grocery option they've had in that location for a long time. Let's not knock on that. But you then have really not much else. You have a couple of food tigers. Well, I guess that's a Greer's too. Not much in the historic area of the city, even though this is where your money is starting to locate. And I had always wanted a Rouse's downtown, and remember that in terms of, if we're going to talk about New Orleans, there is a Rouse's in the French Quarter, and then when you're in much of uptown New Orleans, you actually have very few grocery stores. One of them is the Rouse's at Napoleon Tchoupitoulas. Another is the Winn-Dixie further up Tchoupitoulas. There is a Walmart on the side of the former St. Thomas Projects. There, I guess, what you'd call Irish Channel, which in the long old days ago was where Tom Anderson grew up. But you really don't have, in terms of out there, the kind of, you know, you really don't have that many grocery stores west of France Road in Orleans Parish, actually, except when you're up in Lakeview. But in Mobile, I had locations that I had wanted to Rouse's. I wanted NAPCO and McVeigh. I wanted one downtown. And there's ultimately, if you're going to bring back Dolphin Island Parkway, you need, well, I could talk 45 minutes on what Dolphin Island Parkway needs and the various visions I have. But I just wanted to use that as a segue and an intro. And remember, Rouse's is like Delchamps in that they fit the stores to the neighborhood. And so you have the store in Spring Hill, which is a very, very high echelon designed Rouse's. But then you have the ones in, you know, say most of coastal Mississippi that are generally in the more blue collar neighborhoods, and they're more fit for those neighborhoods in terms of how they're designed, product allotment. Rouse's is one of the better stores at matching a grocery store to the neighborhood, and it seems like the Rouse's in Slidell used to be where the Schwegmans was. But because I remember being taken to Schwegmans when my Uncle John had moved over there by my grandparents, because Schwegmans was right there, like off of Gauze and Slidell or something. But talking about Rouse's in Brownsville, and remember, I'm using a broader definition of Brownsville than a lot of people are. You know, I'm saying almost anything that west of Pace Boulevard you can call it, technically. But the thing is, you look at home prices in Brownsville, you're talking about a lot of historic stock. But if you're looking at, say, where the pollution is, the pollution area is actually generally up by Fairfield. Like where they're building a collect pond is a Superfund site. They're actually building the pond next to a station that says, it'll be interesting to see how that car shows up on road noise. They're building the collect pond next to something that says Mercaptan. Now, we all remember that Mercaptan basically made 8 Mile unlivable. But they actually have Mercaptan there on Fairfield, and that little lot between Fairfield and Palafox, right around where East Street comes in. And so they are building a collect pond there in pollution. But it is that pollution and the location of the jail that are going to sort of limit gentrification up in that area. And in terms of where the roughest area of the county is, it is actually generally along Fairfield, reputationally, and in terms of where the crime reports come from. It's in the roughest, it's there, and then you go up into the higher streets along Fairfield. And then, for example, I hear a lot of people talk about Mayfair. Now, I associate the word Mayfair with a lyric in an old Warren Zevon song, Werewolves of London, where he makes a reference to a part of London called Mayfair. In Pensacola, Mayfair refers to the part of Fairfield Drive, generally just past Mobile Highway going up. But one thing about Pensacola, in terms of racial segregation, it is actually very low, except for the richest white neighborhoods by the sea, like out Gulf Beach Highway, where it's just few people of diversity can afford to live out there. You know, you really have a lot of integration in Pensacola, and that's the thing I first noticed when I came here that made me look positively upon the city, is that the idea, you know, a neighborhood that would look run down and that you would think in Mobile terms would be all African American in terms of cityscape, usually going to be half and half. And in a lot of your up more high dollar middle class neighborhoods, you find a lot of African American residents. There's much more residential integration here in terms of people living together than there is in Mobile or much of New Orleans, quite frankly. It's actually one of the hot, you know, it is unusual enough in the cities I've been in across the country that I'm making note of it. In Brownsville, no exception. Brownsville is generally seen as one of the most struggling areas of Escambia County. But the thing with Brownsville is that you're talking about what was designed as a streetcar suburb. And particularly, I think they ran a line down Gadsden Street, but when you get into the neighborhoods and you look at the houses in Brownsville, you are looking at what is basically historic architecture. You are looking at a lot of houses built prior to 1940, because if you look at the development of Pensacola before World War II, if you look at census figures, you basically have the old historic core of the downtown city. Then you had development in Warrington and Barrancas. And you can see this in the architecture. Brownsville is the next area developed. And there was one time there was a census tract that consisted of Brownsville, Brent, and Golding. But generally, this is where your development is, and there is development out by Golding that you can tell was built prior to 1940 if you look at the houses. But generally, this is your historic core of Escambia County, where your grid pattern is. Your suburban development generally, once you get out of the letter streets, and then there are some numbered streets, at some point you get into the more windy road suburban development here. Brownsville has potential because right now Brownsville has the cheapest real estate generally in Escambia County. Brownsville and the Golding, that is the cheapest real estate in the county. I've looked at the ads, and you can look at the price comparison. So generally here, still, you will pay in this county $70,000 for what you would pay $30,000 for in Mobile County. I remember Florida has a higher property tax, though in Florida, it's actually not the state so much that sets property taxes as the local government. That is generally, with some sales taxes, local governments are more reliant on property taxes here your state sales tax is lower, your local sales tax is lower. Where property tax really shows itself is in local governments, and there's even a table that lists all 67 counties, and there is generally a higher. And you see that some burdens in some counties are on par with your typical property tax burden in Alabama, and then some are the highest millage burdens of a local property tax in the country. And that's, again, a reflective of local government supremacy in Florida. But in the case of Brownsville, in terms of where you would put a Rouse's, I would say somewhere along Pace, not Pace. Though Pace might not actually be a bad location, because I think if you put a Rouse's on Pace, especially around Cervantes and Point Southward, that reinvigorates the neighborhood. But I was thinking more in terms of Cervantes. Actually, though, if you could be technical, perhaps the best place would be on Cervantes between Pace and A. But generally somewhere on Cervantes to Mobile Highway east of Z Street. That would be where I would put a Rouse's, because the thing is, you really don't have a lot of grocery options out there, but a Rouse's is going to bring people into the neighborhood. And the other thing is that right now in Pensacola, it has been block by block, but, Sanders Beach is out in the leisure streets by the water. It's coming back real well. There's a house out for sale in Sanders Beach that looks like an old converted bungalow for around $300,000, and they actually have an indoor heated swimming pool. And I don't know where else you're going to get a heated swimming pool for $300,000. That's really a sort of niche kind of development, but there are people who would buy that, particularly creative class, and particularly my generation. That's a very attractive thing, a heated swimming pool. That's attractive to me personally because of my back problems. But the thing is, we're actually not dealing with many blocks, because you're generally at 7 to 8 blocks between Garden and Cervantes. Now the 5 to 6 to the water. Not really a lot of blocks one way, and so if you put a Rouse's on Cervantes Street, generally west of A and east of Z, where there are not a lot of grocery options, because remember, the old Winn-Dixie was on Mobile Highway at Saltley Field. It has closed. There is a Publix there, but I mean, you're generally, other than the East Hill Publix, you really don't have a lot of grocery options out here, and this is where all the growth and development in the county is currently going. Beulah is new construction. This is redevelopment at this time. But basically, the only growth areas of the county, in theory, in terms of where people are starting to put in money and build more, they are Beulah, and then they are in the historic core of Pensacola. And so, Brownsville, and the idea of Brownsville, and the idea of a Rouse's, I think there needs to be serious consideration that the first Rouse's in Pensacola should be recruited for Cervantes, because still, in that corner of Cervantes, you're close enough that people who, you're placing it so that it's far enough away that the Rouse's in Orange Beach is not going to peel off traffic. And the only real place where it might peel off traffic would be right there in Perdido Key. And still, in Perdido Key, you don't have a sales tax on food, whereas you do in Alabama. And of course, the one in Alabama can't have its own on-site liquor store. But I would say you try and mimic, because the one thing that Rouse's has over everybody in this area is going to be Cajun food seasoning selection. And though another site that I would seek to perhaps locate a Rouse's, though I don't know if you could do one on Mobile Highway, but the old Winn-Dixie site is tailor-made for a Rouse's. But I do think there needs to be one in the city. And the one on Winn-Dixie, and of course that old Winn-Dixie site, that would satiate more of the county that might otherwise go to Orange Beach. But certainly there needs to be a play to bring Rouse's to Escambia County and to other parts of Florida. I would also say, and I'm going to go in on, I could say this briefly because we're coming in on 15 minutes and I'm wanting to cut these talks short, but I would say that in terms of landscaping, that's not the word I'm looking for. What the hell am I talking? Landscape. Oh, yes. Bojangles. Bojangles chicken restaurant. I first had exposure to them in Nashville, Tennessee in 2016. They are generally a North Carolina chain. They generally stayed out of Popeye's country, but they did start building. They built one somewhere in the Birmingham area. They then built one on Dawson Street in Mobile. There is one in Tallahassee on exit 199, and that becomes US 27, or it's US 27 or 29. I know it's Monroe Street. And you come off the interstate and you drive by Publix, and there's a liquor store in that station, but it is separate from the Publix. There is separate from the liquor store. Liquor store is privately owned and not Publix. But the Bojangles is on the right side of the road. Pensacola should try and recruit a Bojangles. Pensacola also needs to recruit a Boston Market. And the reason why I say Boston Market is I've never seen a Boston Market in the state of Alabama or in Mississippi or in Louisiana. The only time I've ever seen one is on Monroe Street in Tallahassee. That's a national chain. And the Boston Market there has drive-thrus. But the thing is, these are chicken dinners in a drive-thru, $7 to $8. About comparable with the bigger chicken dinners now from the fried chicken places, but this is not fried. This is healthier. I think in terms of what Boston Market is and who you're trying to attract into Pensacola, into the historic core, you need a Boston Market as a drive-through option. And I also think Boston Market, in this, it depends on where in the county you put it. But if you put it in the historic core area of Pensacola, where there's a lot less competition for certain types of businesses than out, say, in Ferry Pass and Beulah, a Boston Market would do very well in the historic core of Pensacola, especially if modeled on the drive-through in Tallahassee. It has been 17 minutes, so I will drop this one and try to move on to a different topic. And basically, I'm going to keep recording till my phone charges to about 35 and then try and charge it. Bye.